Good afternoon, Frank.
Hello, Professor.
It's been a long time, and a lot has happened since we talked last. And I think probably the most obvious things which we have to say something about are the migrant situation in Europe and the about which opinions keep changing and circulating, and nobody quite knows what to do. Everybody knows what the best ideas are from one point of view or another, but nobody can work out how to actually practice them collaboratively so that they work. That's one thing. And the other thing is the situation in Syria and what's happening with that. And I think that from what I've been able to understand, the situation in Syria has more global implications than the migrant situation in Europe. Although I have to say that I think the migrant situation in Europe is one local example of a problem that is gradually becoming a global problem.
Hmm.
More and more people moving.
Hmm.
And it's going to become more and more difficult. But we don't have so much to talk about in relation to that, I don't think, because even though The Economist had more or less a special issue on it, which was very interesting to read, I don't know whether you have any ideas, but I can't see quite how the current situation in Europe is going to be resolved, because Merkel keeps going back and forth on it and trying to be politically savvy as well as humanitarian.
Well, the most obvious way to stop it would be to improve the conditions at the origin so people no longer feel as if they have to leave.
But I'm not sure that is really possible.
No, not given what the Russians are doing.
Well, even if the Russians were not doing anything, I wouldn't trust any other country, and obviously you can guess which country I'm thinking of, to do anything useful, because you can't tell other people what to do,
No, no.
and it's a local problem,
Yeah, yeah.
which to some extent was caused by the way we drew the boundaries nearly 100 years ago.
Hmm. Hmm.
But we can't do anything about it now. And similarly, Iraq is getting worse and worse for similar reasons, although I have a couple of colleagues who are currently in Iraqi Kurdistan, which seems to be a normal place to go to and come back from,
Hmm.
doing research there, archaeological research. So you can easily fly from the Gulf to the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan,
Hmm.
and you have a relationship with the government there and go and do research. But it's the only part of Iraq that is safe to go to.
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that. I'm very concerned about the situation right now in Syria. I'm not sure how. On one hand, I'm sure of what the Russians' interests are. I mean, they've had a long-term relationship with the Assads. They have a military base there, a naval base, and it's clear that Putin wants to sort of get back in the game. He feels he's been a little bit marginalized. On the other hand, I think that his actions have pushed Obama now into a position where he really has to do something.
Made it
Either
very difficult for Obama,
made it
and
very
it's
difficult.
I think Putin's 63rd birthday today.
I think so. He played hockey with the Russian team the other day and scored 3 or 4 goals.
But I was sitting on the Bosphorus a couple of weeks ago. I was trying to recognize which were the Russian ships that were going back and forth, because presumably the Bosphorus is an international seaway, even though it goes through a particular country. It must be the
Yes.
only such international seaway in the world. And the reason,
Possibly the Kiev Canal or the Kiel Canal. Doesn't that go
oh
through?
really?
Yeah, doesn't that go through Germany there, or it might go through the
I,
southern tip of
I'm not
Denmark? I'm
sure
not
whether
sure.
it's international in the way that,
Not
um,
like the Bosporus. No.
no. But the reason that Putin is so interested in Assad is that he needs access to the Mediterranean, Otherwise, he's stuck with the Arctic Ocean.
No, it's the old Peter the Great. It's the old story. I mean, the
Yeah,
Russian looking for a warm weather port. Yeah.
and he can rely on that Latakia with Assad. But if he loses Assad, he may lose access to the Mediterranean. I think one has to sympathize with that. If you try to block him, you're going to lose, or at least you're going to have a lot of difficulty. But one thing that I heard, I think I may have mentioned this to you earlier, on the BBC from an Arab journalist, I think from Al Jazeera, was that the conflict of interest in Syria of the Russians with the Westerners, not only America but also Europe, could be the beginning of a third world war.
It could well be. I mean, you have a very small airspace that we're operating on, and I mean, Syria is not a big country. Now you have the British Air Force, the French Air Force, the American Air Force, and now the Russian Air Force. So,
and there's some sort of negotiation going on between the Americans and the Russians to make sure that they don't run into each other in the air.
nothing's been resolved yet.
No.
There's no audio channel that's been identified.
So it's very interesting from the point of view of globalization in the thread of topics that we've been talking about, that this type of local conflict is becoming more and more common as minorities start to feel that they have an option because of what they know about what's going on in other parts of the world to advance their own interests in a place where they couldn't do it before, and that everywhere that they do it, they attract the interest of a larger power, at least one larger power outside, so that every local conflict becomes a global conflict in potential. And that's, I think, something that happens with globalization.
Well, I think you're right, because I think but for the advent of ISIS, the United States would certainly not be operating air sorties over Syria. Obama steadfastly kept away militarily for quite some time until ISIS became such a challenge. And the fight against ISIS, of course, is what Putin is hiding behind.
But why do you think Obama says that ISIS is an American defense problem?
Well, I think because he's already talking past Assad.
But still, ISIS hasn't threatened America in any credible way.
No, certainly not like Putin identified when he was interviewed on 60 Minutes. The very first thing he said is he referenced the 2,000 to 3,000 Russian fighters who are now with ISIS, who he does not want to have come home. He said, I'd rather fight them there than in Russia. The United States doesn't have a similar profile, at least as far as we've been told. So I don't know why Obama is saying it's an American defense issue.
It's difficult to make sense of that, except in terms of America's policies over the last 50 years of trying to manage a global situation.
That's right, reverting back to the world policeman routine, which is something Obama has done his best to step away from.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point.
So we're back to this situation where local things are getting out of hand in a number of different places. They attract larger interests, which then gives them global significance, but nobody has any international authority to do anything about them, except the Pope.
Well, the Pope has a lot of international authority, but I don't even think he would be able to have done anything.
He's the only figure in the world who has more than national authority.
Yes. I'm telling you, if I'm in the White House right now, I'm doing everything I can do to restrain myself from just picking up the phone and calling Putin and saying, okay, all right, we're in on this for the next 90 days. Let's join forces and get rid of these people, and then try to let the chips fall where they may later. Presumably, Assad will be somewhat chastened. There's not going to be a retribution campaign like his father. Who knows? I don't know. But it's a question of which is the bigger evil here now. Is the bigger
Well,
evil ISIS or is the bigger evil Assad?
I don't think that Assad is capable of managing Syria anymore.
I don't think so either.
And because the situation that his father was able to control for 30 years has changed. And became, I mean, Assad has really never proved that he could do it. He just took over a situation that was already controlled, and he's gradually lost control of it.
Correct.
And now the growth of ISIS, which is part of his loss of control, has got rid of the border between Iraq and Syria. Iraq is obviously a failed state. So we're stuck with Syria, Iran, Turkey, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, and Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and Lebanon,
Mm-hmm.
which all seem to be working reasonably well.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that we can decide how the area in the middle is going to be managed, I think is, I'm surprised that people really think that that's a possibility anymore.
Well, I'm not so sure that on a visceral level, I'd always been hoping that the United States was going to step in against Assad. But on a pragmatic level, I realized it was really none of our business. But on the other hand, this ISIS situation, I think, is everybody's business. And
But another thing that the Arab journalist said on the BBC this morning was that if I think it was him who said this, that the Saudis are financing ISIS.
yeah, supposedly, yeah.
So, and we're supporting the Saudis.
Well, we're back to the old story again. 19 of the 20 hijackers on September 11th were Saudis.
And Saudi Arabia is also destroying Yemen,
Yes.
and accusing Iran of being at fault, but there's absolutely nobody's shown any evidence at all that in fact Iran has boots on the ground in Syria, in Yemen.
Hmm. I had a discussion with a fellow that I know from Jordan last month when I was in Europe, and I've known him for a little bit, and he's an Arabic speaker, and he told me in no uncertain terms, he started laughing at me when I had hypothesized to him that the younger generation of Saudis, the influential Saudis who were coming up, the 30 to 40-year-olds, were much more liberal than the existing ruling class. He told me absolutely not. He said that's a dream. He said they're as conservative, if not more so, than their fathers and grandfathers. He said their attitude toward women, toward democracy, toward social change, toward
Women
money.
is true. The woman problem is a global problem.
Mm-hmm.
We still have we haven't got rid of it in this country yet.
Mm-hmm.
But in places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia, it's way behind any of the more urban countries.
Right, right.
However, there's a lot of opposition to Salman already.
Yes, yes. Within the established group, or
Yeah.
oh, there is. Tell
Yeah,
me more
and if
about
it's
that.
opposition in the establishment, you can be sure there's opposition under the establishment as well.
Okay,
And
okay.
he hasn't been there for a year yet.
No, no. Where's the opposition coming from?
I think there's a lot of people in the family, which is enormous. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what the numbers are, but it includes everybody who has any responsibility in the kingdom, pretty much.
Okay.
There's a feeling that he's not managing the situation in a way that is going to be able to that is sustainable.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Well, according to this fellow, any successor that's plucked from the younger ranks is going to be no better.
well, I think that I don't know what the background of your informant might be, but I think that he's right in terms of the woman situation. But I wonder.
And he's an Arabic speaker who visits there frequently on business, goes shooting with them, takes saunas with them, and I mean,
Probably goes with the people whose ideas aren't changing.
presumably, yeah.
But what is happening is that more and more Saudis are becoming more and more aware of what the world is like outside Saudi Arabia,
Okay.
and that's changing the way many of them think. And it may be a slow process, but it's changing.
Hmm.
Uh,
I was a little dumbfounded by his claim, and because I mean, I had always hoped that the future there might show some
and
eventually.
what's going to change the gender situation in Saudi Arabia is not the attitude of the males, but the energy of the females. And they probably didn't let him talk to the females.
Probably not, but they could bring that whole country to a stop if they wanted to.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, thank you, Professor. It's always a pleasure to be back in touch with you.
We'll see because things are happening faster and faster. We'll see where we get to next week.
Next week, we can't do it monthly anymore because the world keeps changing too much. All right.
Okay.
Thanks very much.